How do the most famous DMs in the world keep their games fair and balanced? Well, let's check a bunch out, starting with Perkins, whose advice is to remember that the rules are there to serve you, not the other way around. If something comes up in your game and you're not sure how to handle that particular situation, sure, fall back on the rules. If you have a player who say wants to push over another player and everyone at the table is arguing about how it should be done and you don't have a good idea in the moment, then use the official shoving rules. But you don't need to let the rules dictate how every single situation goes. If you have a player who say wants to push an NPC over, and it would be hilarious if they did, or it would push the story in cool, unexpected ways, then you can just let it happen. Or you could make the shove a bonus action just this one time. You can do whatever you want. Don't let the rules rule you. You rule the rules. This video is sponsored by dScryb. It's a super easily searchable library full of descriptions, sounds, and interactive maps. And it's made my prep time so much easier. Also, just the ability to look up descriptions and stuff on the fly during games, very helpful. And your players won't even know. They also just released Opus, a web app where you can prep a description, have music, ambience, and sound effects playing, as well as much, much more. Over 3,500 sound options are available, and it's made my game so much more immersive. For a free 30-day trial, use the link and code in the description. And before we move on and take a look at Matt Mercer, one more tip from Perkins. It's fine to not allow something. On one side, we just said you can use the rules when you need them, or move away from them when you see fit. But that doesn't mean you should allow your players to do whatever they want. There's this idea that you should always yes and never say no. But if the rules don't allow for something, and you don't want it to happen as a DM because it will destabilize the game, there's like certain core rules that I think all DMs would want to make absolutely solid and never be broken. And as a DM, it's up to you to figure out what those are for you. But if your players want to do something against the rules and you as a DM simply don't want it to happen, then you should say no. The whole yes and thing is great for keeping the flow of the game going, but a flowing game is nothing without structure. So don't feel bad about saying no, as long as you have the rules to back you up. The rules are there to serve you. Matt Mercer will often break rules as written, if the logic doesn't make sense. A great example of this is at the Wembley live show, where he fundamentally just asks Marissa to tell him how Sentinel would stop a giant monster, because it just doesn't make sense for it to be able to do that, even though the rules say it should.
That is 15 damage. Sentinel, he does not move. Yes!
Please tell me how Sentinel stops this creature.
Fair.
Are you being patronizing? I don't know what you mean.
Yes, I am. It is not stopped by Sentinel, I'm sorry.
But it was a natural 20!
I know, it did some damage. I wish I could say that, but logically, I'm gonna say no.
And this is a great way to deal with rules lawyers who want something to happen because it says it should in the rules, but it just wouldn't make sense in the game world. When a player wants to do something questionable, using rules as written to back them up with their request, do what Matt does and ask the players how they think it would work. Like, if a player just wants to hide in an open field, ask them how they do it. How do they hide in this open field? And if they can't give you a good answer, tell them they can't do it. Or maybe they do come up with a really good answer. Maybe they have a blanket that they throw over themselves that's grass coloured. Or maybe they're a halfling and the grass is really tall in this area of the field, so they just get real low to the ground. Give them a chance to plead their case, and if they come up with a logical, cool argument, you can let them do it. But if it doesn't make sense to you, the DM, in the moment, you can make a ruling to ignore the rules as written in this exception and move on. And just as a bonus, Matt Mercer can be pretty cheeky with rules as written to heighten the player's experience. An example of this is how he handles perception checks. As far as rules as written goes, you would never ask a player to roll a perception check, or any check to find something really, or see something, if there was nothing to be found or seen. But Matt will ask for a roll if the player asks a very specific question. For example, if a player asks if something that they can see has visibly changed, Matt will ask for a perception check even if he knows nothing's changed, and even if it's super obvious it hasn't changed, and never will change.
Touch the redstone.
Yeah, I point out the redstone in the stained glass window that hasn't changed, right?
Make a perception check.
Fucking Mercer! 19!
Looks pretty much the same as you recall.
God.
And you might be like, isn't that a waste of time? Asking players to roll when there's absolutely no reason to? And the answer is yes, to an extent. But you don't do it all the time. This is like a very rare, every once in a while thing. But doing it sometimes does two things. One, it creates a chance for the player to fail and just hilarity would ensue. And two, it kind of makes it harder for a player to metagame. For example, if the player asks if there's any traps in the room and the DM just says no because there aren't any, then the player knows there's no traps in the room. But to flip it, if a player asks the DM if there's any traps in the room and there are traps in the room, the DM now asks the player to roll to see if they can find the traps. And even on a failed roll, the player's character doesn't know there's traps in the room, but the player definitely does, because why would they have to roll if there weren't traps in the room? So this is where Matt's trick comes in useful. While there's no need to make your players roll if they don't have to, if they go out of their way and ask to fundamentally do a check, let them do it. It will keep up suspense and help curb metagaming. Oh, speaking of perception checks, why don't you roll one to see if you can see the subscribe button below? The DC is like a 2, so chances are you do see it. It's right next to the like button. Aabria Iyengar has a really interesting DM style when it comes to keeping games fair and balanced, and that's that she holds her players accountable for not knowing the rules themselves. I don't mean she expects players to know every rule in the game, but she does seem to expect them to at least know their character sheets, know how their characters work. I've seen it a few times where she gets quite feisty with players who try and do a spell without knowing how it fully works, or try to do something when they're just not reading what's in front of them fully. I remember one in particular, I think it's Exandria Unlimited, I'll see if I can find the clip, where a player casts a spell or takes an action that causes them to lose invisibility. But they didn't know that their invisibility would drop when they did that. And there was kind of this moment where the player was like, oh, I wouldn't have done that if I had known that I would have lost my invisibility. And Aabria was like, well, sorry, the information's in front of you on your character sheet, like that's your responsibility.
Oh no.
Which
And I cast invisibility on you.
thus breaking your invisibility.
Fuck! You're invisible now.
And I just look down and
Sorry, I didn't know
shake
that
my-
word.
You have the spell, right?
Fuck!
You are responsible for that information, my dude.
God damn it.
It was almost a punishment for the player not reading their character sheet properly. And I gotta say, it did come across as a bit harsh, but I think every DM out there has that pet peeve of players not knowing how their characters work at all. I mean, they created the damn thing. The DM's trying to do so much stuff, and when a player kind of has a spell on their character sheet in front of them and asks the DM like, oh, how does this work? And the DM's just like, I'm doing, like, you tell me. Just know how it works, because it makes games so much faster. So kind of punishing players like this who often misread spells, or sometimes just don't read spells at all, will encourage them to actually learn their character sheets, which is such a big weight off a DM's shoulders. Another Aabria observation that I've noticed is that she doesn't really suffer fools lightly. And I've kind of seen every DM in this video do this to a certain extent, but it goes a long way to keeping your games fun, fair, and balanced. And it's the ability to put your players in their place. As a DM in a player-DM argument, or even in a player-player argument that you're spectating, you have the ability to just say how it is. And if players kick back, you can just say no because I'm the DM. Which, now that should be kind of a last case scenario, because no one likes a DM overlord who's just saying how it is without backing it up. But if you as the DM are trying to prioritize all the players' fun at the table, if you are trying to be a referee, fair and impartial, and players keep pushing back and arguing with you, or if they're just acting in a way that's kind of dragging down everyone's fun at the table, then it's completely in your purview to tell the player how it is and say, we're moving on. And then if the player keeps pushing back after that, which would be insane, then feel free to pull that player aside from the rest of the group and talk to them and try and figure out what their actual problem is. And if you still can't come to an understanding after that, maybe this group's not the right fit for that individual player. And this is really where a session 0 comes into play, because normally you would make a kind of social contract with your players, which means you can really back yourself up as a referee DM at times like this, because you have something in place where you have said, if there's a disagreement, or if something happens in particular, or if people are unhappy, this is what happens. I mean, I got all my players to agree at session 0 that if someone keeps cancelling last minute, or keeps missing sessions week in, to the point where there's just an empty chair for most of the time, then that players should be okay with stepping back from the campaign, stepping down from it, because we have other friends who want to play, and it's kind of unfair to hog that seat. And you can set up a bunch of little rules like this that you get your players to agree to, one of which should be the DM gets the final say on all things, and when the DM decides to move on, everyone moves on and doesn't hold any like bad feelings or ill intentions about the decision. I mean, it kind of becomes less of a social contract and a borderline actual contract when you really get them agreeing on particular points, but it sets expectations for the game moving forwards and gives you an out to just shut down most issues, sometimes before they even begin. And I actually have a little D&D contract between DM and players written up for free on my Patreon right now. You can grab this, you can kind of change details, dates and times and things like that, put your own points in there, take some of mine out, whatever suits your table, and you can get your players to agree with this. And if issues pop up in the future, you can kind of like pull it out and be like, oh, remember when we talked about this and this is what we said would happen? Well, yeah. Also, if you go over there and you want to become a paid member of my Patreon, I mean, I wouldn't be mad, and thank you. Brennan Mulligan is a great referee, simply by knowing the rules of the game so damn well, and he has no issue bending them if the story benefits from it or the player's fun is heightened because of it. But one of my favourite things about how Brennan deals with the rules of the game is that he's not afraid to homebrew them completely. He either borrows from other places or he just creates his own completely. But he doesn't necessarily stick to rules as written, and he does a bunch of this in his actual play, The Never After. He has a death blow rule, where if someone crits on someone else, there's a chance that the target could die in one hit. He has another homebrew rule, where if you take a ton of damage, there's a chance you take a level of exhaustion. He uses a called shot rule, where if you have advantage on taking a shot, you can choose to instead take disadvantage, and if you succeed, you can hit a pinpoint really small accurate area with the hit. And he has a great rule called rolling with emphasis, where you roll 2 d20s and take whichever number is furthest away from 10. So if you roll a 3 and a 16, the 3 is further away than 10, so you take the 3. Or if you rolled a 19 and an 8, you would take the 19, because 19 is furthest away from 10. This means that when you roll with emphasis, you are way more likely to have a really big number or a really low number, which is great for like the everything or nothing rolls. The rolls where just getting like a 9 or an 11 would be really anticlimactic, because you want to either really succeed or really fail. And I stole most of that info from the Dungeon Coach and their video called 4 Intense D&D House Rules from Dimension 20 Never After. So if you want to know more about them, check that out. But my point is, don't be afraid to make up your own rules or changing aspects of other rules. And just do it temporarily, just to see if your players and table prefer them. If they don't work, roll it back. Just let your players know that that's what you're doing. Open communication is so important here, and just make sure you take feedback. Also, Brennan and pretty much every DM in this video is not afraid to look up a rule in the rulebook during a game. This is like a super small point, but it's really important. As a DM, you're not expected to know every single rule. And especially for new DMs, the pressure is on for them to just keep things flowing, keep things moving, just go. And if you don't really know how a rule works, just go with whatever in the moment. And that's fine, to be honest. You can totally do that. Like we said earlier with Chris Perkins stuff, the rules are there to serve you, not the other way around. But if you are a DM who does want to stick very closely to the rules of the game, and that's fine too, then don't be afraid to stop gameplay temporarily, pull out the player's handbook, pull out the DMG, pull out whatever book you're using, and look up how the rule works or how the spell works. If Brennan and Matt are willing to do that in front of thousands of people during an actual play, which is high budget and costs money, then you can definitely just do it at your home game with your friends and give them a chance to nip to the bathroom or grab a glass of water or a beer. The only thing is, when I see Matt and Brennan do this, they're really fast flicking through those books. Like, the only tip here is to kind of know the layout of the DMG and the player's handbook, or at least know how to use the contents page quickly, because you can be in and out of that book in no time if you know roughly how it's laid out. And another great thing all these DMs do is they referee through NPCs. Like, if they have a dispute or an issue that pops up, or a player's trying to do something that they shouldn't be able to do, in character as an NPC, the DM can say, no, that won't work, for whatever reason, within the game world. Players are much less likely to fight back if they're talking to an NPC, because it will keep them in character as well. Keeping people role-playing, keeping them in the game, makes them less likely to think outside the game at how rules work. In fact, using NPCs as tools like this is incredibly powerful, but to use them in this way, you need to know exactly how to create and run them. And you can learn exactly how the world's most popular DMs do just that in this video here. Thanks for watching.